Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's episode is award-winning Michael Toulouse, former program director for WICR Radio's Classical Music Indy. Join me now as I go on the aisle with Michael. Good morning, Michael Toulouse. So happy to have you on the podcast today.
Good morning, Tom Alvarez.
It's great to see you. You know, for our listeners, I often see people when I'm out and about. It's always a great opportunity to find guests especially because I run in circles where there are lots of people who are related to the arts. And since this program covers the performing arts, when I saw you at a Christmas function, and I had been thinking about you, we talked about it even before, so it was fortuitous that we ran into each other. And you filled me in, and then I realized, well, gosh, I've got to have Michael on to talk about what's been going on. You retired from WICR, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Now, my longtime employer actually was, and maybe you knew this, or these names would be familiar to you.
I was about to give the whole thing, but you go ahead and tell it.
Okay,
yeah, go ahead.
For about 16 years, I was employed by the nonprofit organization formerly known as the Fine Arts Society. It became Classical Music Indy. So they wrote the paychecks to me. And right. Although initially we were doing our own fundraising on the air, eventually, the organization switched to a different business model, still with WICR, but instead of taking over the airwaves for its own fundraising, instead raising money on WICR's behalf, which WICR then pays back to the organization. So anyway, long story.
Yeah, but you know, the fact of the matter is that people get confused about brands. You know, that's why TV stations start putting their logo on the air, but it still doesn't do any good because people don't know what their stations or what call letters or whatever don't mean a whole lot to the public. Would you say that's true? I would.
How often, in fact, if you don't mind, how often do you tell your listeners that you make this podcast at Wish TV?
It goes right over people's heads, and frankly doesn't care, so people don't care. Okay, so how can it be a podcast if it's at a TV station and young people know what a podcast is, right?
Yeah.
And it's a new platform, if you will, podcasts, and so people don't know how to access it, except young people, but people my age, and I'm in my 70s.
Yeah.
They're confused by it. Is it like radio? How do you get to it? So do you listen to podcasts?
I do.
Yeah. What are some of your favorites?
Well, this was...
Besides mine, of course. No.
I will just... Again, I'm going to digress just a little bit because this was the awkward thing over the past few years.
Yeah.
I used to listen to the radio exclusively, but over time I was making this transition to podcasts and yet feeling like, I got to be loyal to traditional radio. That's where I'm making my money. That's where, that's how I pay the bills.
Right.
But now I'm free to just disclose all the podcast listening I've been doing over the years.
Yeah.
I think for me, although I did back off a little bit over the summer, I was really into political podcasts. I was listening to all the coverage of the election and all the discussions. And then because I've had over the years, a lot of hobby sort of type of interest in German, I listened to some German podcasts.
Interesting.
So, there's so much international content. There are two parts about podcasting that, to me, make it so much better than radio. One is listening on demand. So you can encounter whatever content you want at the time you want to encounter it. It's very convenient. The other part, of course, is that it is truly international. You can access any content from anywhere. Whereas with radio, of course, you're always limited to the reach of the station. So,
well, I'll tell you, I spoke of people are confused about who aren't familiar with podcasts, how to listen to it, where to find it. So, but also people think that I have to remind them that you can also do it on your own schedule. Don't have to listen to the whole thing. I always advise people when you're on the way to the grocery store or the bank that's a really good time. And I don't know how many times I've listened to a podcast and I've had to go inside and then I'll come back. And sometimes I'll sit in front of my house in order to listen to the end of it. Have you ever done that?
Yes, I've done that. I've also, I get a lot of my podcast listening done at the gym.
Also at the gym, walking, or if you're a runner or you're walking, if you're cooking, that seems to appeal to people that you can do it on your own schedule.
Yeah.
If it's not live or if it's on radio, obviously you can't, unless you, whatever. But so you've got a long career that I want to talk to you about. So first of all, tell me about where you grew up and your family life and your education.
Okay, well, I found this out recently. Believe it or not, I didn't know for many years that I was actually born in Fargo, North Dakota.
Really?
Yeah, because I was raised.
Fargo.
Yeah, right. I was raised in Moorhead, Minnesota from my earliest years. It's just my mom went across the river. The two cities are adjacent to each other, so my mom went across the river to the hospital in Fargo. And the reason I found this out, I was getting my passport a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh. Big long delay because the state of Minnesota had to write me back saying, hey, look, we don't have a birth certificate for you. So you're going to have to figure out where you were born. That's when.
Wow.
Anyway, long story. But then ended up going to St. John's University in Minnesota. And that's where Minnesota Public Radio was founded. And it was over the course of my years at St. John's that I got really interested in the way they presented classical music on the air. It was a real strong tradition of radio production, especially public radio production in Minnesota.
So is your degree in broadcasting, communications, or what?
It's in music literature.
Interesting.
So sort of, kind of a traditional teaching bachelor's degree, although not as much teaching, more emphasis on...
So did you learn technique by listening to their radio? Their coverage?
Yeah, that's right. And then, cut my teeth on a job, a wonderful job in Fort Wayne.
Really?
Yes.
My hometown.
Oh, yes, that's right. We haven't talked about this. At that time, it was WBNI. Yep.
So is it still around? Yeah.
Well, so this is like inside baseball for Fort Wayne listeners, but, it's a podcast, so you probably have some people listening in Fort Wayne, right? But we'll tell you this. It was on Wells Street. You remember Wells Street? Yep.
Sure.
So the YWCA, there were some buildings there. And
how long were you there?
I was there just 4 years, and not long after I left, they moved into what was then a brand new fancy building out in an industrial park in northeast Indiana, and northeast Fort Wayne.
What were those years you were there?
Oh, from 87 to 91.
And how did you like Fort Wayne at that time?
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. It was...
Well, I don't think it changed that much from the time I left there in the early 70s, and it was a great quality of life, vibrant arts community.
Yeah.
And, they have a Philharmonic.
Oh, I know.
And ballet. They have opera, I believe. They've got Pitt. That's where I trained in theater at Purdue Indiana Theater when it was called that.
Pitt.
I don't think they call
I remember Pitt.
Yeah.
Now it used to be, of course, IPFW. Now it's Purdue, Fort Wayne. Yeah.
I'm glad that I grew up there. It's a small city, but it's in many ways very sophisticated. A lot of highly educated people there and arts lovers. And so
I agree.
I think it was a great starting point for me. But I left only because there weren't enough choices.
Sure.
And, that's why I moved to Indianapolis, because I was going to live in the state. This is the place I wanted to be.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
One other thing about Fort Wayne, two things, actually. And you probably remember this, too. In the late 80s, that community was basically reeling still from the after effects of two major things. One was the closure of the International Harvester plant.
Yes.
The other was a flood.
Yes.
Massive flood,
Oh, right.
Yeah, and so the community.
The three rivers.
Yeah, three rivers.
And over where the station was located, was that one of the worst points?
I think it got close. Got close, but I wasn't there for that. I was there in the wake of that. It's just I was hearing all the...
I see.
And the big thing going on back then was deciding what to do with that downtown commercial property that perpetually flooded. And I think they came up with a great solution. I mean, now, it's been years now since I've actually been in the downtown area, but, the whole thing was, let's create a park. Let's create areas. Square. Yeah, just a beautiful area there.
Yeah.
So Fort Wayne has a lot of great things going for it.
It's very attractive downtown.
Yeah.
And they're doing what a lot of other cities. People are moving downtown, building condos. I think the baseball park had a lot to do with that redevelopment too, or the development, right?
That was certainly, it was after my time, but yeah.
Well, so then what happened after Fort Wayne? How did you get to, was it Indy next, or you tell us?
There was one more stage. It was Louisville. I was at WUOL. Those were the hardest call letters to say, WUOL.
Oh my gosh, I guess you're right.
So,
and you're not pronouncing it Louisville, but you're not from Kentucky.
You know what? My boss sat me down one time and said, it's Louisville. And I said, I know. But here's the thing. I have to shift gears to say WUOL, and once I've done that, it's like it's hard to just downshift.
Of course, you're from Minnesota.
Yeah, I know. I had to overcome that. That was a long time to overcome that. And I mean, my first radio job, the one in Fort Wayne, my supervisor said, "Look, it's not W. You got to say W."
Oh my
it's
goodness!
W, and I mean,
you have to articulate.
Yes, well, and of course, I was a professional, and this is certainly good advice, frankly, from a supervisor. So I started doing that, and then moving to Louisville, WUOL. Those call letters.
Well, know that all of the country broadcasters are supposed to be neutral, but I for one love regional accents because I'm an actor, but I love mimicking those accents. So I hate to see them go away and all. Okay. Everyone sounds like all the broadcasters want to have the New York model or the Chicago or, the neutral, right?
Yeah.
So in any case, how long were you there?
That was just 3 years.
Okay.
Yep.
And how did you like Louisville?
I loved it. Loved it. Yeah, my wife and I.
What did you like about it?
I guess probably near the top would be the restaurants. I just fell in love with a lot of great restaurants down there, and some of them are still in existence. One is Jack Fry's, and my wife and I go down there on a regular basis just to eat there. It's a fantastic place.
And I met your wife at the Christmas party. Talk about her friend. Let's give her a shout out. Lovely person.
Robin Toulouse. Yes. Nay, Robin Lip. And of course, my partner in life. We're childless, but we've had lots of pets over the years. And she had bought her house not long before we met. And we've told the story to everybody.
Yeah, but you told it to me at the party that we went to, and I thought it was great. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to do it. I don't do it as well as she does. And there's one detail that I'm probably going to get wrong, but I think my version is better, so I'm just going to do it this way. I used to interview somebody down in Louisville who was at the Speed Museum, and she had moved there from Indianapolis. And so she knew Robin because she worked at the Children's Museum where Robin was working back then. So she got to know me. Then she heard that I was moving up to Indianapolis. And so she just mentioned to Robin one time, hey, there's this guy I know, Michael Toulouse. He's moving up there. He doesn't know anybody. You should give him a call. And so Robin waited. She waited, I don't know how long. It was several months. But then she decided that she would just call me. And so I got this call. She identified our friend, and I guess I'll say her name, Valerie. She said, Valerie Henderson suggested I give you a call because she said you're new in town. And then, so Robin was very friendly. We proceeded to talk, for about half an hour, And then I said, finally, now who told you to call me? And she said, Valerie Henderson. And I thought, I don't know anybody named Valerie Henderson. And then Robin remembered, it was Valerie also. She had gotten divorced. So her last name had changed. And I had met her by that name. And so that's why. Anyway, so I just thought it was great that the two of us had this long conversation, and there was really there were no references. There was no, nobody. It was just Robin's own friendliness and charm that was there. That spark was there, in other words, and it didn't involve anyone's, there were no, it wasn't, certainly wasn't a job interview.
Right. And so what unfolded as a result?
Oh, well, then I guess we made plans for lunch at Basbo, and then after that, it was just not long.
Yeah.
Then there was a date. I think we went to our first official evening date was Butler Ballet, and they did Cinderella. And Robin, this was so sweet. She sent me a thank you card. She sent me a card, and she had put some little trinkets inside it, like a slipper, and it was just the cutest thing. Yeah, it was just, and she does.
So you were smitten, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning, right?
Yep.
When was that?
When we met, no, actually, I moved here in '94. So '95 is when we met. Yeah, so our anniversary, a big anniversary coming up this year.
And she had a great career, right? Is she retired as well, or is she still working?
She is retired. Okay. Yeah, she was at the Children's Museum for 20 years, much longer than even I was at the Fine Arts Society. So.
And, and since I can drop any names I want here, let's say that it was Tina Mayhern who hosted the gathering, a good friend of yours, and they worked together at the Children's Museum. And they both said that those were very happy years.
Yeah,
they
were
in on some of the major growth of that museum, correct?
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And what happened after the Children's Museum?
Robin left there, I guess, around the time Jeff Patchen started. Okay. And then she moved on to some independent consulting work in museums, in the museum field. She had a very interesting project at the Medical History Museum.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that, too. Yeah, I love that place.
Oh, that's a great resource, too.
Let me ask you something. Unique. Did she listen to you regularly when you were on the air?
Oh, yeah, she did. She did.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so you got to Indianapolis, and tell me about that. How is it that you made your way to Classical Indy? Is that when it started, or was it FYI? Well, FYI, right?
Yeah, okay. FYI. Yeah. I moved here in '94 to work at WFYI. At that time, they had classical music through the day, and you had Morning Edition, and you had All Things Considered, but during the afternoon, you had classical music, and so I was an afternoon host. Now,
that's when I first encountered you on the air, yes. Okay.
Yeah, and after some time, we were all picking our own music. During my job interview, the person who hired me said, we'll talk about you at some point selecting the music. I was asked, are you interested in programming the music for yourself and for others? And I said, yes. Now, we never did put that in writing, but it did happen later. That is what eventually happened. So that was a sort of, that part of the experience was a transition for us as a staff, but I think we made it through. I think I learned quite a bit about myself and, of course, about others too.
What did you learn?
How to work as a team. I didn't. The issue when you have everyone choosing their own music is that the station, when you cross that border from one host to the next, becomes a different station sometimes, depending on the tastes of the people picking the music. And sometimes that's what you want. Other times it's not what you want. And I mean, it's certainly a negotiation. Everyone has to figure out. And I think it's good for the station manager, or whatever that person's name is, whatever their title is.
Give me an example of what you mean. Someone's taste in music is different than another's. And so are you talking about genres? What are you talking about?
Well, I'd say it's a question of rotation.
Or composers or whatever.
It's a question of rotation.
Yes. Okay.
So there are some people who say, oh, Beethoven's 7th Symphony, wonderful, love it. Let's play it this weekend, January 20th, and then we'll play it again in June.
Okay. Gotcha.
I have a problem with that.
Okay.
I say, okay, Beethoven's 7th is an important enough work that we need to hear it if we play it in January, we need to hear it sooner than June.
Okay.
The next time we hear it needs to be sooner.
Why is that? Why do you feel that way?
Because that's the kind of music that draws people, or drew people, to the radio back then. That's why people listened to the radio, is to hear, we called them the war horses. And you have, those pieces have to be played in a regular rotation. So when you have someone scheduling the music, this helps.
And you got enough feedback from your audience to validate this, this.
There was positive feedback, and then there was also what we would call constructive criticism. And I believe that was...
I bet you did.
Yeah, and that was just as valuable, of course.
Yeah.
That was just as valuable. So
yeah, classical music listeners can be tough cookies, right?
They can. But the other side of this is, of course, if you turn all the responsibility for music programming over to one person, as they eventually did for me, then, there are other announcers who are justifiably hurt.
Yeah.
And so it was an exercise in, like I said, listening to other people, figuring out.
So you studied classical music history and other courses related to music for your degree?
Yeah.
Okay. What were some of the other things that you studied that prepared you for being a program director?
Well,
and a host.
I think for the hosting part, at least, and the diction, when you get a music degree, in most programs, you have a major instrument. My instrument was my voice. I was a singer. Oh. And so through singing, I learned, a bit about foreign languages and a bit about diction, which certainly helped.
I guess I meant the repertoire. How did you educate yourself about the repertoire?
Well, a music degree, too, involves a lot of listening. Yeah. And maybe you've heard people talk about the drop the needle tests. So there were plenty of those in college. So
prior to even going to school, did you grow up listening to classical music?
Yeah, I did.
Were your parents influential?
They were.
Or teachers, or whom?
No.
School?
Yeah, I'd say it was more, I think, some records that my parents had in their collection. And they got them, I think, from a neighbor who had moved away.
Okay.
And so...
You remember some of those records?
Sure. It was Antal Dorati leading the Minneapolis Orchestra, I believe, at the time. I don't think it was the Minnesota Orchestra yet. Classic recording, though, Tchaikovsky. So the 1812 Overture and Capriccio Italian. And this was the recording where they actually went to great lengths to get the sound of a particular canon. And there was even a track on the album by Deems Taylor, the famous music announcer, describing how they got this sound. And you heard the sound of the canon. And so, anyway, that was one recording I'll never forget.
That's the kind of detail that I used to love listening to on your shows. Your knowledge of music history as well, and the research that you did when you go on the air, and the stuff that you talked about. I love that. I mean, as a writer myself, I do my share of research when I write reviews and such. So, I have a great appreciation. You're an educator as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm
a nerd, self-described nerd, but I particularly like your style, but also the fact that I learned a lot over the years from you, a lot.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
It prepared me for my own work in many ways. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as a critic? I mean, when you go out and do these things, or what do you?
Well, when I'm a reviewer, I don't consider myself a critic. There's a book that was given to me by Richard Roberts, who's with the IRT right now.
Okay.
At one time, he was the editor of Arts Indiana. That's where I first wrote my first reviews. He called me one day, and this is about you, but I'll quickly
please
tell you the background.
This is my favorite. Okay. Is it when I get in? I can't help it.
Now you're interviewing me.
Yeah, I can't help it. I can't help it.
That was slick.
I can't help it.
I'm happy to share that with you, though, because I don't consider myself a critic. I consider myself a reviewer. In fact, my background's in television. I was a TV director, and, I picked up a lot of journalism by osmosis. I didn't have a degree in broadcasting or journalism. I learned while doing, but as a director, talk about osmosis, I was around some of the most talented writers and producers and news people. And so I learned about journalism through these folks. They were, at that time, Channel 6 had some of the most respected journalists. Howard Caldwell was just one number on the air. And they were old style. A lot of them came from newspaper. And so I learned from them about writing. And so much of my reviewing, I see myself more as a reporter. I like to put people there. And I don't spend a lot of time critiquing. I'm also an actor, so I'm more likely to critique acting and directing rather than writing a lot about the plot or the script. I don't like spoilers. And I learned from two of the best reviewers, if you will, the critics. There was an evening newspaper and a morning newspaper, if you recall.
Yeah, so the Star.
Yes, and Charles Staff was the evening.
Yep.
And Charles was always accused of writing too much about the plot. And he could be really, testy at times. And then the other morning critic was often, people thought he was too nice. And so there's a middle ground that I kind of observe. But in answer to your question, I think the true critics do new work in New York. I consider them true critics. Brand new stuff that's never, and they do a really good job of introducing those works to the public. But I've been doing this for a long time, Michael, so I've seen things 3 or 4 or 5 times. It's an occupational hazard. So enough about me. Let's get back to you.
Well, no. I'm just really glad you mentioned that point. Because I think that's so true about New York. That if you're talking about a brand new thing that no one's ever seen, well, then a critic has a very important job, or could, in theory. Whereas if it's material that's very familiar to people, I can see.
And I could opine about scripts or plays or content, but it's already been vetted by people more experienced than me. So I like to concentrate on that which I've done. I've been an actor, a director. I'm quite familiar with the technical side of theater and music and dance, but that's a whole other thing. So, did you have a lot of competition when you went for that job at FYI?
Not sure. Sometimes you get into a job and they're not going to tell you exactly who all was applying for it.
Yeah.
So,
did you get a sense, though? Did you have callbacks and stuff? Or, was it a long process of selection?
It wasn't too long.
Okay.
I made one drive up here, and from Louisville, it's not that far.
Yeah.
So, and
how did you hear about it, by the way?
The public radio stations had.
Got it.
Yeah, back in those days, of course, there were no. This was and the internet was in its infancy, and so job listings came, I think, to the stations through teletype.
Yeah.
And you'd have the.
That's teletype.
Remember that?
Oh, boy. Yeah, I sure do.
Yeah, we had a teletype.
Yeah. So I think I've always wondered, how did you... I've been to FYI, and, I had a relationship with them, but I would go by the studios, and I would see libraries of records, but when did that shift to tape, and where did the music come from? I guess I always wanted to know that.
Yeah, when I was hired, so WFYI has evolved over the years. It was in a building at 13th and Meridian.
Right, catty corner from Channel 6 where I worked. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so I think it was, or was it 14th and Meridian?
14th? I think it was 14th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
right next, it was just right of the cathedral.
Yeah.
For those listening, and from the old Cathedral High School was across the corner. St. Agnes was, that whole corner, right?
Well, and when I moved to town, I lived in the Winter House.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Right across from Channel 6.
So this was either a dream or a nightmare for depending on how close you like to be to work. Okay. But, when snowstorms would come, in radio and TV, this often happens. You know, if there's a big blizzard coming, you'll get a call from the engineer or someone saying, "Hey, we're going to book some hotel rooms. You want me to get you in?" And I could always say, "No, thanks. I don't need to. I can walk."
Well, there was a hotel down the street that they put me up to because I was a sign-on director, and I needed to like be there, like to sign on, like at 5:30. But anyway, the Winter House.
Yeah, that's where I lived. And so, anyway, back to your question. At that time, I believe we had a mix of LPs and CDs. Now, probably it was mostly CDs by the time I worked there, but down the
So
basement.
it wasn't
and you
tapes, it was CD. Okay.
Yeah, tapes, I think at that point we were all digital.
Yeah,
so we were
okay.
playing tapes. I think we recorded programs on tape
Right.
and played them, but I could be wrong about
Yeah.
that. I think satellite stuff that we recorded, I think would have been recorded on digital audio tape, and we would play that digital tape. I think it was that era. So, things were making a transition. By that point, I think by the time I was hired in Indianapolis, reel-to-reel tape was basically gone.
Okay.
But when I first started working in Fort Wayne, late 80s, I was editing content on reel-to-reel, using a razor blade and all of that. So, yeah.
Wow. So you went through a continuum. I did too, yeah.
Yeah,
and
you
TV.
remember them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you remember those days.
Sure. Oh, yeah, 16 millimeter for me, and Beta and VH, 2-inch tape, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. All the technology we've seen. So then WFYI eventually did purchase the building north of that building, so also another rather old piece of real estate. But then radio moved to that building, basically across the street from the other part of the organization.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I think in traditional radio, if you played LPs, if you played albums, you usually had two turntables, of course, because you'd go from one song to another. You go from one symphony to another. You had to have that second symphony ready on the second turntable. Well, by the time we moved across the parking lot, and I think I've got this right, by that point, we were down to one turntable because we knew it would be so rare that we'd ever go from one LP recording to another LP recording. It would always be from CD to LP.
Yeah.
Or usually just CDs.
Okay, so how long were you at FYI?
I stayed there until it was actually that first stint was just 2 years. Robin and I got married, and I got into computer programming. So I had did several years of computer programming.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So did radio then, when did it become, was it at FY that eventually became all computer, the programming, or the music itself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all that stuff, the tapes and the turntables, that's pretty much gone.
How did you like that transition?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was great. I mean, I had a boss who, so I worked in computer programming until the .com bubble burst, basically, and so I was laid off, and then so that just came to an end, and that was the sort of thing that happens to people sometimes. But I was hired back as an evening announcer part-time at WFYI. They had classical music in the evenings back then. And so my boss at that time, wonderful man, very generous to be able to.
And who was that?
Jed Duvall.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, Jed.
Yeah.
So he hired me back, and I mean, he hadn't been there when I left, but he was happy
What
to
was
see me
his
back.
title?
He was manager of radio, I think. Yeah,
got it. Okay.
Yeah, the manager of the radio station.
Uh-huh.
But Jed, he was a tape guy. He was the razor blade and tape guy. And so one week when one of the important talk shows, the producer was out sick, Jed had to fill in for him. Now that guy used Pro Tools. He used a very sophisticated digital editing platform, which even I don't know how to use. But I was used to editing. By that point, I was used to certainly using software to edit audio. Jed was not used to using software. So Jed dubbed the whole raw tape, all the raw content to tape, and edited the tape to get the contents of the show down to 59 minutes, and I thought, wow, that's old school right there,
Yeah.
So I just couldn't,
What was the culture like at the radio station at that time?
For me, it was very supportive. And I think for a lot of people, it was supportive. But at the same time, you have to realize in a dual licensee station that is TV and radio, there's a sort of competition.
Yeah, I always wondered about that.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
And the issue of, are we going to promote TV on the radio and vice versa? So.
And what was it?
Well, I frankly didn't want to even get involved in that.
Okay.
I felt like there was a stage there where they were calling it the teleplex.
Ah, yeah.
And that word has gone away, but I began to refer to our listeners as consumers of teleplex product. And meaning that, like you earlier, you mentioned how I said I was working at a station in Fort Wayne. You said, a PBS station.
Yeah.
And the point is, it was not a PBS station. It was an NPR station. But to the listeners, these are transparent. These distinctions are totally transparent. It's immaterial.
Yes. And I validate my own point that even I don't know what brands are.
Yeah, exactly. And I knew so many people who loved classical music, but also loved the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. And also, I think it just made no sense to me to say, well, how dare you take our listeners away from us?
There are two different meanings. One's visual and one's,
Yeah.
One of the things, I still love the radio, just in general, I love radio. I get all my news from NPR in my car. And if it's television, it's PBS and NPR. And so I still love radio because I grew up on it before television. And using my imagination and having whoever is on the air helping me to form my own images. So I still have a great appreciation for radio and, having worked in TV, of course. So,
and you think of shows like Radiolab. I don't know if you've listened to Radiolab ever. Also available as a podcast, by the way.
Exactly.
But incredible use of sound.
Oh my gosh.
And such.
And the reporting on radio too, sound effects in a war zone or wherever. If they were doing a story right now on the California wildfires, you would hear it. You could hear people in the background, the first responders and the people who've lost their homes and all of that. Talk about drama, and you can use your own imagination. Anyway, so, yeah. So then when did you leave FYI the second time around?
Well, so I worked, it was part-time initially, thanks to, Jed finding a place for me. Eventually, it became a full-time job, still mostly in the evenings.
Okay.
And I guess it was 2008. So after about 6 years.
Okay. Had you missed being on radio during the couple of years that you had moved on to do the computer programming?
I did, kind of. I did.
Yeah.
I did.
What did you miss about it?
Really just the listening. And you'd sound strange. I mean, of course, you can listen without being on the radio. But I mean, that evening shift where I was actually just right there listening to make sure everything was going okay, then it's you're back into this more attentive sort of mode where before you might, if you're programming a computer or doing some kind of activity and the music is on in the background, this is just, you're not engaging with it in the same way that you are.
So you really had to focus and concentrate.
Yeah.
And that had to have just increased your knowledge of music because you heard things over time that you would hear something new and different that you could communicate to your audiences, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah,
details, right?
That's right. Nuances in various recordings, for sure. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that you don't get the opportunity to do as much, at least in your normal day-to-day work, if you're not working in radio.
And that's been my experience as a reviewer when I go to hear a concert and hear the same piece for years. I hear something different every time I hear it again,
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
It's ever changing.
Yep.
So then what happened after FYI?
I was recruited by the Fine Art Society in 2008.
Okay.
So.
And who was at the Fine Art Society at the time? Who hired you?
Megan McKinney.
Okay.
Do you remember Megan?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
And?
So.
What's happened to Megan? Do you know?
Yeah, she's moved out east. I'm not sure what line of work she's in right now, but we are Facebook friends.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Remind me of the mission of the Fine Arts organization. What was their mission and their overall mission?
At that time, it was sort of a hybrid mission. It was mostly producing radio programs, and so I was hired to program music, and eventually I became a host too, and supervised other announcers. But there also was a music education component to the mission. And so the Fine Arts Society at that time was going into schools and doing music lessons. They had a whole collection of electronic keyboards that they would use, and they would go out into the community and reach out to people in that way. Now that part of the mission was eventually dropped. They decided to focus on radio programming.
I should back up. When you left FYI, was that the end of classical music on FYI?
No, I think, the station has scaled back its classical music offerings over the years, and I frankly don't remember exactly what happened to classical music in the evenings after I left. I think there were still some programs. But we're talking now, 16, 17 years ago.
And why did they decrease their classical music on FYI? What was the thinking?
I'm not sure. I think you in radio you have to go where the audiences are, and I mean that's and I think
so. Younger audiences weren't interested.
Well, system wide, you had a lot more interest in news and talk programming.
I see.
For sure. And I think younger audiences too are interested in different kinds of music.
They were no different than all the other performing arts, developing new audiences to replace people from the baby boomer generation, or the World War II is nearly gone, and my generation is is in later life, and so they're all trying to develop younger, newer audiences.
I got to tell you, too, I think every organization involved in classical music in any way has to come up with its own strategy. And I think the Indianapolis Symphony has done some remarkable things.
Well, come to think of it, I love what Steve Hackman is doing, the composer, the conductor, who does hybrid. He matches Beethoven with Beyonce. He's hugely successful, and he is drawing in those younger audiences.
Well, I mentioned Beethoven's Seventh. I was at the last concert with June Merkel, his first official concert as music director. Beethoven's Seventh was on the program. Fantastic program. That plus the complete Three-Cornered Hat, the ballet by Manuel de Falla. Usually you hear orchestral suites. You rarely hear the whole thing. So he did that. And that house was packed. It was packed. And this was a very straight ahead. And I mean, yes, Stephen Hackman has done incredible things to bring in young people.
Yes.
But I don't know what they did. I kept wanting to ask someone, so how did they get this house so full?
What was the demographics of the audience? Just anecdotally, what did you see?
Anecdotally, I think most people were younger than I am.
Really?
Yeah.
So they like the war horses.
It was amazing. So you got to hand it to...
What is it about that piece, though, that resonates, do you think, with young people?
Beethoven's Seventh? If I had to guess, I'd say it's that second movement. It's a very solemn, somber piece, and I mean it was.
It's been used in a lot of films and over the years. For the audience who's not familiar with it, can you name any of those, or how people would recognize it in popular culture, for instance?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know. What I know, the story I love to tell about it, which gives you insight into modern classical music performances, that movement was encored at the premiere. So in other words, the audience was so excited. Yes, they did applaud between movements back then, and they applauded that movement so much, the orchestra played it again. And in fact, that movement became so popular, other conductors began inserting it into other Beethoven symphonies. They would drop the existing slow movement and plug in the slow movement of the seventh, almost like your iPod on shuffle, And so I can't even imagine that kind of an approach. But,
now, this is what you would include if you were playing this on the radio, Michael. That's that anecdote, that story.
Oh, well.
I think the first time I heard about Rite of Spring Stravinsky, and I remember you talking about how people were outraged. People stormed out of the theater. And back in the days, people's response to new music, it just always seemed so dramatic. People didn't like it. They were very clear. And yet this music later, after the composer died, it became popular.
Yeah.
When it premiered, especially Stravinsky, because it was so out there, right, for people?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right. And you can't imagine, people going crazy and rioting over Wagner, I mean, but this happened.
Yeah. So how long were you with classical? Is it classical music indie?
Yeah,
correct?
now it's classical music indie. Mm-hmm. And so I started with the Fine Arts Society in 2008. The organization changed names over the years, and I left in July of 2024.
Okay. So you are retired.
Yeah, right. And it's partial retirement. I mean, I'm 60 years old. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the finish line is in view, but.
Oh, no, you got some good years left. I have to say that I'm 77, so, I mean, come on. You've got a lot to contribute. How are you using your time now?
Well, I've got a part-time job. I'm working with AI training. So some people are familiar with that. And that it's fine, although, the work is not steady enough, frankly.
And what are you doing with all of that knowledge about classical music now?
I guess just attending concerts, as an informed listener, and not attending enough concerts. Frankly, I kind of wish I were out there.
What's your observation regarding June Merkel and what he brings to the ISO? June Merkel is the new artistic director. What do you mean, artistic director or music director?
Music director, yeah.
Yeah, music director, yes.
Yeah.
And he has been, 2 seasons now?
Well, his official start as music director was just this past weekend.
Okay, that's the official. Okay.
Yeah.
All
but
right.
for actually a number of years, I couldn't actually tell you how many, he was an artistic advisor to the orchestra.
Yeah, so he's been on that podium before. He was way before they hired him. So he was like a consultant to them for a long time, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So the musicians certainly knew him. I can tell you I've interviewed in this podcast, I've interviewed Austin Huntington, the cellist, Kevin Lynn, the concertmaster, and Sherry Hong, violinist. And they've all sat where you are. They actually, some of them gave me recordings, but actually Kevin Lynn and Sherry played their violins live in the studio.
Oh, man.
And to have Kevin Lynn play his Stradivarius sitting right where you are over there, I mean, that was a rarefied experience.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm honored to sit in this seat.
But they all were just ecstatic in their compliments about June and working for him. He's re-energized them. And they talk about how excited they are because they have hope. Whereas, I mean, all the young people who've come on because of the resignations and the retiring of the old guard and the ISO, they bring all that vitality. Do you agree? I mean,
oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, so many things to say. These are some observations about the Indianapolis Symphony. Number one.
Share them.
Last season or season before, Jennifer Kristen, the principal oboist, played the Strauss Concerto. And I will never forget this. I was out in the audience and I looked around and I saw so many people from the orchestra there to hear her play.
Wow.
And I thought, I can't think of a better compliment than, to have your colleagues showing up. And then Sherry Hong's a sort of similar effect. Robin and I went, we normally just go to the traditional classical concerts, but last season, i.e. 2023, we decided to go to Yuletide.
Oh my goodness.
And That was incredible.
Oh.
That was incredible. And she had, with Sherry, it's partly the look. Let's be honest. She's got this incredible hairstyle and this dress that was, stunning. But then she played incredibly. And it was a very adventurous arrangement of Vivaldi. And it was fantastic. She did it with such style. And
where I first saw her? I saw her perform solo. I'd not seen her perform solo. Of course, I didn't, going to concerts. But she was soloist for the men's chorus, in Indianapolis men's chorus, and she did an arrangement of Sting's Roxanne. I think the version that was in Moulin Rouge, maybe. I don't remember, but it was, she knocked me out. It was electrifying. Yeah. And then I saw her this year in Yuletide. And when she did Frozen and a couple of other pieces and the beautiful gown. And I love the way she was showcased. So,
but important to note, she's not...
her music. But her music, I tell her, there are few musicians who touch me viscerally like she does. Mm-hmm. Viscerally. I can feel it in my bones.
Well, and in this community, there are so many musicians like that. Some of them with associations to the symphony, but not as prominent. And I'm thinking of Kathy Hirschberger. Someone else with these classical music. Indy has been involved with Classical Revolution, and she's been played such an important role in keeping that going, so.
She sounds like a good podcast guest.
Yes.
I'll have to keep her in mind.
Yeah, I recommend.
Good for that, Chet.
Yeah.
So you agree with me that it's a new orchestra with new leadership and all these new musicians. I mean, it bodes well, doesn't it?
Oh, I think so. Definitely. Yeah. And
One thing I talked about all those three musicians I mentioned is they are all excited about the prospect of touring, of recording,
Touring.
Yeah, they can't wait to put Indy on the map.
Did they mention specific destinations? Now I'm turning into the reporter again, but
not so much. They would love to tour to Europe. They would love to, and many of them have. I know Kevin Lynn. He came here from Britain.
That's a good.
I think it was London Symphony.
You're putting me on the spot, but I believe you're right.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He came. He missed the U.S. and so. He came here, and they all yearn to do that. The three of them, their talent matches their ambition, as musicians, to have wider audiences, bigger audience see them.
Yeah.
I believe that Gene Marco can get them there, I think they believe.
Yeah.
What is your observation of Gene Marco himself as a conductor?
I have nothing but praise for the way he works. I think it's just incredible. I mean, I think people probably already realize this, but one of his trademarks, because of course of his background, is he loves Strauss waltzes. He definitely cherishes the tradition of it.
You know what I miss? I wish they'd bring back the New Year's Eve concerts where they would do the Strauss, the traditional.
Man.
I really miss those.
Yeah, well.
I went a couple times and they were very special.
Well, the thing I want to hear more of, and I want to do this more, is I want to go and hear the orchestra play with the movies. I just think, you can't think of a better space. Two things actually about Circle Theater. One is these incredible opportunity to see movies with an orchestra playing. That's just
with
incredible.
The click track I like to look at the click track when I go with all the little monitor, the conductors.
Fascinating how they do that. Yeah, it's great. And then the other thing, of course, is the Saint-Saëns Third Symphony, because to hear it in Circle Theater with the organ, that's when you realize the whole building is an instrument. I mean, the whole building is an instrument. And so hearing, I think, I'm just glad that they play the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony on a regular basis. Like I said earlier about Beethoven's Seventh, it's something you just need to hear.
I was supposed to see Elf, and I missed it. I was so disappointed because I had a guest from out of town. But yeah, I think I've seen up to at least 10 thus far. But I understand orchestras all over the country now have taken the cue that it's a moneymaker for them. A great way to bring audiences in to be introduced to the symphony.
Yeah.
It's a very soft way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and depending on what you do, like, I mean, I saw a TV report about the organization, the company that helps orchestras do this.
Yes.
One of their features is Jaws. And so this incredible John Williams score that's really just famous. Picture that.
Yeah.
Just imagine an orchestra playing that as your...
someone who is doing that early on before orchestras around the country, the pops orchestras, and he's local. He's from, I believe, Fortville. George Doherty. Did you know George? The Disney movies.
Oh,
He's
really?
from Indiana.
Okay.
And he started his own sort of company, and he conducts symphonies around the country doing Disney.
Really?
And he did that long before orchestras started doing that. I thought you might have interviewed him.
With a projection
Yeah,
too.
he played here with the ISO.
Okay.
It's been a while, but
did he use any of the technology, like the screen with the
same
the cube?
thing? Yeah.
The cube bar. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good education for people as well to see how movies are scored. It's the same process.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conductor looks at the screen and, it's not, the screen, the print or whatever,
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. It's really good.
Yep. Well, now, have you interviewed Jack Everly or?
Yes, several times.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to get him and also Ty Johnson. I've interviewed them for my online column. But they're quite entertaining in interviews. Have you interviewed them?
Oh, I think I interviewed Jack once, but
Jack told me some really great stories about when he's up on the podium that he, it's a character. He's he's actually quite shy. But when he's up there, he's in performance. It looks and he's very good at it. But he says he does his father, who was like a really well-known merchant in Richmond, and he was very gregarious. He had a very successful company. I can't remember what his product was, but he said he basically emulates his dad.
Just channels him.
In Richmond.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I'm very proud of the ISO and what they represent for the community of Indianapolis, and I would love to see them get more exposure, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
It's been a delight talking to you. I bet you've got some great stories, so I'll have to have you back on for, just to talk about anecdotes, and you can drop names of people that you talked to and interviewed over the years. Do you miss that part of it?
I loved doing the interviews, but I'll tell you frankly, one of my favorite interviews, and I won't say the guest's name because this wasn't a problem with the guest. He was incredible.
Yeah.
But I started that thing and I was like, I got the listeners. I thought I was getting the listeners all excited about it. And it was like a 20-minute interview. And about 2 minutes after I started it, the phone rings in the studio. And it's a moment of constructive criticism.
Okay.
It's a person saying, Michael, this is great. This is a fine interview, but I'd rather hear music. And it just was a humbling moment. It was a humbling moment. But, that is the bottom line for me, Tom.
Yeah.
The point is, we're listening to music. And the same thing goes for introducing a piece of music. I didn't like to take a whole bunch of time to introduce the music. I like to write out what I was going to say, get through it, and just play the music.
Yeah.
To me, that was...
Let's not talk about it. Let's listen to it.
Let's listen. Yeah. And I loved these interviews. They were so good.
It's so interesting that you should say that, because whenever I have musicians on, that's why I make sure we play their music. This is not a music show. But if I'm going to have musicians on, of course I have to hear some of their music.
Yeah,
that's the whole point.
Good for you.
And of course, because of royalties and rights, classical music is not a problem, public domain, right? Or something original, but you also have to own the recording or we can't put it in the show. So sometimes that's a bit limiting. But when Kevin and Sherry agreed to actually play their instruments in this very space, it's like, oh my goodness.
How cool.
It's a big deal, right?
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I did, years ago at WFYI, Matt Heimovitz, the cellist, came and did an interview, and we did it in a studio, and he brought his instrument and he played, and I loved it. I just thought,
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I thought I was on the right track. And moving forward, I'm going to be interviewing more musicians, all genres, jazz, blues. Rock would be a little difficult in the room this size,
Sure.
and it would require some special engineering to make it sound. But I had Jenny DeVoe in here with Paul Holdman, the guitarist,
cool
together, and it's like small studio.
Yeah.
What they do, I think that's something I'd rather do. But anyway, what a delight having you on, getting to know you. I've been a big admirer of yours, and, I frankly miss you a lot. And I think that you should get a podcast, You should think about it.
Well, the thing about podcasting is, and this is for very practical reasons, and you were alluding to them, licensing.
Yes.
I'd love to be playing music. That's what
right.
I'd really like to be doing,
Yeah.
and that's very hard in a podcast because
It
you
is.
don't have the license. You don't. This is a different medium.
Yeah.
So people pay to hear their music streamed, and there are
exactly.
places to go for that. And
Exactly.
so, my work as a radio announcer was in a specific sort of genre that's,
I have an idea. Sometime you should come on with me together, and we should have a musician on, and all of us chat sometime.
Oh, that'd be fun.
My mission is to cover the arts, but I think there are a lot of folks who one wouldn't think have a connection to the arts. But I believe that everyone has a connection to the arts. They just don't realize it sometimes. Art is all around us, right?
I love that. I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
And I think that I can go to places, or I can bring people in who you wouldn't think. I'm going to be interviewing people from the sports world. I think there's a lot of use of art in sports, and sports there's a lot of drama, a lot of pathos, and, there's a reason why they have entertainers sing national anthem and so on and so forth. So anyway, thank you again. Thanks for giving me your precious time, and I hope we'll have you back on.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
All right. Take care.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.